Hi, Charlene or Sarah. Can you hear me?
Hi, Andre. Yes, we can hear
I
you.
can't hear you. Wait, let me get my volume up.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, I don't have to play the DJ today.
Okay, I can hear you now.
All right.
I actually figured out how to do this.
You should be.
We probably get in trouble, huh?
I know. You should be in here.
So, okay, we're live already. Just
All right.
FYI.
Is everybody joining tonight? We have full council?
Yes.
Okay. So we can't ask about your pet pig.
Oh, but we can.
Most of them. Beginning of every meeting. Dreamies talked about.
Yep, dreamy.
So 1 hour meeting?
I don't know how long these presentations are. Uh-oh, you're frozen. Andre, and are you in a good spot?
It's only yours.
Yeah, decent
Oh.
spot. Yeah.
Uh-oh,
Uh-oh.
it's
frozen.
me. My network is bad. Where's Gia?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
I can see you. Everything looks fine on my end.
Yeah, it was definitely me. It gave me an error on my computer. That's not good. I just got to make sure I'm on the Wi-Fi.
Tara might be joining as well. I don't know if she is or not. I assume she will, since she's been dealing with the
When are you
work.
going to have them all come into the office?
Actually, Michelle was in today. Kevin was in today. I couldn't remember what they looked like. Thought I had to send them a map to figure out.
Kevin was in today?
Yes, Kevin was in today.
Kevin,
He had to dress up?
He actually had a tie on because he had another meeting. I was like, wow, impressive.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to mute for a minute.
All right, we'll see you in a little bit.
All right, sounds good.
Hello, Mayor. How are you? Okay. Just wanted you to know I'm here, okay? Right. What is it? I can't hear you. Whatever you said.
You're muted.
Hello, now
look
I'm
like-
unmuted. Hello. You didn't hear the cough, so that was good.
I didn't hear all that.
Good to hear your voice, Mayor Pro Tem.
Oh, it's so sweet. Thank you. You're feeling better, I
I
suppose.
am.
Okay,
I am.
that's good.
Every day is a little progress. I'm
Okay.
feeling so much better. Still have that
Okay.
pesky cough, but I'm much better.
Okay, all
No
right.
fever. That's always a good thing.
That's
So-
a good thing. I was worried about it. Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
I'm good. I'm good.
I know you didn't feel well, but you still looked cute. You look pretty, so that was a good thing, right?
You know, so here's the thing. Here's the thing. So, you know, I have to wear makeup, and that's what makes the difference.
Oh, whatever. I only can tell
I'm
that
not,
you
I'm
have,
not one of those. I'm not one of those people that can get away without makeup for sure.
I don't believe you, but anyway.
Yeah, no,
I don't, but then again, I still don't believe you, but you look gorgeous with red hair too. I'm like, oh my goodness.
I know people are shocked. I know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what a cute. That's so
Yeah.
cute. That's like, oh,
A wee bit of the Irish. And my mom, when she was young, my parents both looked like movie stars when they were young, but my mom she was blonde, she dyed her hair black. She could get away with everything.
Really?
But I never saw her with red hair, which is what she got in her and a few of her kids. So
Oh, wow.
I
Wow,
know.
well, you got lucky, right?
Yeah. Oh, I don't, I'm not so sure I thought that when I was a kid, but
My best friend in high school had red hair, so I always
really,
I thought it was super cool. Yes, but
Yeah.
you see, you don't have freckles, and she had freckles.
I did have freckles. They disappeared,
Really?
but I had, woo,
Oh, wow.
I
Okay.
did. Yeah.
Oh,
But
well.
they started going away in high school. So I was good with that.
Okay.
I was good with
That's
that.
cool.
But
You know,
I'm part Cherokee, so I'm kind of this weird.
Oh,
mix of
I get
things.
it.
So I actually tan. I don't go in the sun too much anymore, but and get freckles. So which it's it's kind of
I
weird.
got you. All right. I know what you mean. Okay.
Okay. Okay, so I see Councilmember Becerra is with us. Do we have Councilmember Gomez yet?
Not yet.
Okay. And let's see. Hello. And do we have Pastor Davis?
I don't see him on yet.
Okay. And is Mr. Metzler with us yet?
Not yet.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go get a drink of water and I'll be right back.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
time. Madam Mayor, you are muted.
Thank you. Councilmember Gomez, can we test your audio real quick?
Absolutely.
Okay, we can hear you well. Thank you. And is Mr. Metzler with us? Yep, I see you. All right, very good. And we should be ready to start in a moment. I think I saw there's Pastor Davis. Welcome. All right, so before we begin, if everyone will bear with me a little bit, I'm going to have cough drops in my mouth tonight, so I'm not coughing all night. If you'll just bear with me on that, please.
Yeah.
All right, is everyone ready? We're going to go ahead and begin. Good evening. Today is Tuesday, May 11, 2021. The time is 5 p.m. The special meeting of the following will come to order. The Victorville City Council and the same council also sitting as the Victorville Library Board of Trustees, Southern California Logistics Rail Authority, Southern California Logistics Airport Authority, successor agency to the Redevelopment Agency, the city as housing asset successor, Joint Powers Financing Authority, and the Victorville Water District. Madam Clerk, will you kindly call the roll?
Councilmember Becerra,
Here.
Councilmember Gomez,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Irving,
Present.
Mayor Jones.
Here. Thank you. We have a quorum. Pastor Davis, will you lead us in this evening's opening prayer?
I'd be honored to. Thank you, Madam Mayor. For tonight's invocation, we'll go back 800 years. One of my favorite prayers, the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi. I hope it's a blessing to you as it's been to me over the years. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I might not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, Lord, to receive as to give. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. It's in Christ's name that I pray. Amen.
Amen. All righty, Mr. Metzler, I understand that you're going to lead us in the pledge to our great flag this evening.
I will, and I have my flag ready. So would everybody stand up, face the greatest flag in this world, and repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Metzler. All right, Madam Clerk, will you kindly present the agenda and any revisions thereto?
Tonight's city council meeting is being held virtually on Zoom due to safety concerns related to COVID-19 and to reduce exposure for our community members, city employees, and council members. Our virtual meetings are conducted in accordance with the Brown Act and special provisions enacted during the coronavirus pandemic, and will be held this way until further notice. We invite members of the public to participate in our meetings via Zoom. However, for those who do not wish to comment on issues, our meeting may be viewed on YouTube. For future council meetings, public comments may be submitted via email to the city clerk. Submissions must be received no later than 4 p.m. the day of our council meeting. Thank you, Madam Mayor. There are no revisions.
Thank you. And also this evening, we do have an addenda item, and that'll be taken up immediately after item number 1. With that said, council members, do you have any declarations of conflict to make? Conflict of interest? Okay, seeing or hearing none, we're going to go ahead and move on. So once again, welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Victorville City Council. Your City Council is interested in your ideas and opinions, and furthermore endeavors to incorporate them into its deliberations. At the same time, the council must be able to carry out its business in an organized and efficient manner, free from material disruption. Therefore, this meeting will be administered in accordance with the council's established policies and procedures and Government Code Section 54957.9. Open meeting laws do not confer any privilege or protection for expression beyond that otherwise provided by law, nor do they permit council members to engage in dialogue during the public comment periods. All testimony is to be directed solely to the council. Individuals may speak to issues not posted on the agenda during the public comments section at the start of the regular session, providing those issues are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city. Individual speakers may address the council once per public comment period and once per each appeal and public hearing item for up to 3 minutes. When comments are invited, click the raise your hand feature located on the Zoom screen. Individuals will be unmuted, called on by name, then recognized by the presiding officer. The speaker will state the item number that will be addressed or that the subject is a non-agendized matter. Speakers are requested to comment as briefly as the subject permits. The presiding officer may decrease the time allowed for public presentation, depending on a variety of factors, including the number of persons wishing to be heard. The presiding officer may also take a poll of speakers for or against a particular issue and may ask that additional persons speak only if they have something new to add. Audience members may not disrupt, disturb, or otherwise impede the orderly conduct of this meeting, and those who do so are subject to removal from the meeting pursuant to Penal Code 403. Your understanding and cooperation are appreciated. All right, with that said, Madam Clerk, do we have any requests to speak?
We give a few seconds. Yes. We do have one hand. Councilmember Gomez.
Councilmember Gomez is going to speak as an audience member as to which item and or a non-agendized matter.
So I have the ability as a public commenter to public on all or
Yes, but the chair, as I stated in my opening comments, that the request is to state the item number to which you wish to speak and or a non-agendized matter.
Yeah, I choose to reserve and just place a comment.
Councilmember, are you going to speak to item number 1 or the addendum item?
Like I said, I'm choosing to reserve and just place my comment. You can.
Thank you. The member who wishes to speak is not being cooperative, but please proceed.
So objection is prejudicial.
Member Gomez, this is not a trial. This is not a courtroom.
It's my time. And if you want to take my time, please stop the watch. You may do so, but don't take my time.
Ms. Gomez, the clock is always stopped. The clerk knows to do that automatically when I have to have discussion or a comment to make to an audience member or a council member. Just again to reiterate, this is not a courtroom. It is really preferential that you speak according to our policy and procedure, but as you're speaking of as a member of the audience, certainly a member of the audience does not have the authority to correct the chair. So please proceed.
So as a member of the public, I do have the authority to speak on anything, even if it's on the agenda. It's my understanding. And so that's why I'm choosing not to respond to your question. So please place your comments, please place your attentions to the agenda's first paragraph, because this is what I'll be referring to in its content. Our meetings are co-opted by partisan political interests that seek control and greed. Policies that were recently changed as the old guard started losing momentum, thus adopting oligarchic measures. Oligarchy refers to a small group of people within its institution. In other words, old money has usurped performative powers, such as those that are familiar and that we see in drama. Plays that capture our attention while being enthralled. It's not parliamentary authority, but a mixture of subjective motives. Just wait and see the appointed people craft a ventriloquized rendition where it's taken from. Pick your best. A zombie movie, watch it play out in what we see most HBOs. Seriously, it's a rendition of a professional, whatever you want to call it, a performance right in front of spectators. No one, at least not in my world or yours, has empowered any single person to dictate upon any commentators or speakers his or her interpretation of data analysis or factual measures that are brought before the city of Victorville. When the city decided to take the contract from the county of San Bernardino, it wasn't to save any mechanisms, and you will see the addendum. So how is a special meeting of a workshop that renders less than or not even more than 50% that are capable of being able to construct what water rates are going to look like in today's meeting at 5 o'clock? We should be placing meetings at the first and third. It's bad enough that we don't have enough participation and we don't do it just legally. I think we have to go beyond the means and make it more viable for our communities. Very few people will be participating, and it'll be very unfortunate of the outcomes that we have seen as in the past. And that's my reservation as a public commenter. And I wish always when I speak to not be reprimanded, just like any other public member. I take different positions and it's my right. And if you don't wish to be reprimanded, I choose the same. I think we measure with the same measure that we want to be measured. And this is nothing against anyone saying anything about me. It's just my right to be able to speak. And that's why I choose to speak as a public commenter. So thank you for granting me the opportunity. The Constitution did it. Unfortunately,
Your time is up.
Sometimes it doesn't seem
Thank
that
you,
way.
Ms. Gomez.
You're welcome.
Right. Mr. DeBornowski, has the chair in any of its rulings since she took the position been subjective rather than objective?
I have never experienced that happening, no.
Thank you.
Objection
right.
prejudicial.
Member Gomez does not have the floor and will suspend. This is not a courtroom. All right. And Madam Clerk, are there any other requests to speak?
The next speaker is Galaxy A12. I believe it's Maggie Martin.
Thank you. Good evening, Ms. Martin.
Good evening, Madam. Oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So let me just say something right up front. Let's just get this over with and get this party started. I have watched Council Member, speaking to all of you, Council Member Gomez go through a whole over 4 or 5 years set of rhetoric that after it's run its course, which is generally way too long, a set of language or expressing herself. Now she's on this, I'm going to use legal terminology kick. So I'm just wondering, can she give me a timeline of how long I'm going to listen to her talk about objection, prejudicial, and all that nonsense that she doesn't even know what it even means. She's out of context. She's not in a courtroom. And I'm not going to use any bad language, but makes a fool out of herself and to the public. She needs to know that. She looks ridiculous to anyone who would not know her and tune in and see this for the first time. And here's what they'd think. Who does she think she is? A lawyer? We have a lawyer. His name is Andre De Bornowski. This is not a courtroom, Ms. Gomez. Thank you. That's it, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Madam Clerk.
Those are all the speakers.
Thank you. So our public comment period is now closed and the chair brings the items back to the council. With that said, we're going to take up item number 1 in our first business order, which is written communications. And we'll begin with that, which is the water rate study workshop. Mr. Metzler.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. We're here on one of our off Tuesdays, really intending to have this meeting serve as a workshop. The original focus was just on water, and of course we did add another item that we'll discuss a little bit later. But the real intent of this meeting is to focus on a very complex study that has been prepared by a consultant that will give you a presentation here in short order. But I did want you to know that this rate plan, this rate study that's in front of you today is really resulted from close to a year's worth of work in analyzing and assessing our water system. And this is something that we try to do every 5 years. And in fact, the last time we did it was around 2016. And that starts with the master planning, which the council had recently reviewed and approved the master plan. That master plan really is intended to be a look forward over the next 10 years and determine what does your water system need, both in terms of operations, maintenance, and even capital upgrades, so that we can continue to provide a water product to our ratepayers, residents, and business that is safe, that is healthy to drink, and is reliable. And so as a part of the master plan that you'd recently reviewed and contained with it is a capital improvement program. All of that information then goes into what you have here tonight, which is a cost of service study, a rate plan study, however which way you want to call it, that really also analyzes over the next 10 years what your system needs to continue to operate, but also it considers what is it going to take to continue to maintain certain cash reserve levels, whether they're your capital reserves, whether they're your operating reserves, or even reserves to achieve your post-employment benefit obligations. So with that, we do have a presentation. With that presentation, you'll see a very complex analysis, but you'll also see recommendations as to what is being recommended for the course of the next 5 years in terms of rates. What rates need to be achieved to maintain your water system at the desired level. And so with that, they will have some recommendations for you to consider. Upon completion of the presentation, the vision is that we have an opportunity to take any questions or comments or address any concerns you might have with respect to the presentation, with respect to the recommendations. The timing of this is coincident with our budget making process, and we're knee deep in the budget making process right now. In fact, we're expected to have a workshop with the council towards the end of this month. So the feedback that we can get from you tonight is critically important, because then we can start shaping that a little bit more formally into the budget that we're planning to present to you in a couple weeks. And presuming that the recommendation contained in this presentation is carried forward, then our vision is to bring the document back for approval in June, which would then commence the official Proposition 218 process, where we actually have to mail ballots out to the ratepayers, start the protest election process, with an ultimate goal that any rate plan that's being recommended and approved goes into effect August 1st. But of course, what we take from you here will be considered in our budget workshop, and we'll make some assumptions as to where the where we're going to go with this plan, we'll actually start incorporating in the actual final budget documents. So with that, the lead on this project is your Director of Public Works and Water. I'm going to turn it over to him so he can introduce the team at NBS. NBS is our rate consultant. They've worked with us on many utilities. In fact, they're the rate design consultant for the previous 5 years. They're very knowledgeable about our system, so it made a lot of sense to keep the continuity in place for them to study and make the recommendations for the next 5 years. We've also worked with them on other cost of service, including solid waste. So at this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Matthews so that he can attend to anything I missed. Otherwise, he'll introduce our folks from NBS.
Thank you, Mr. Metzler, and good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. I think that summary hit it spot on. So without further ado, I'll introduce the consultant from NBS who's going to be presenting tonight. You have Mr. Greg Klumpner from NBS and Ms. Alice Boo. They'll be kind of teaming this on a front end and back end of the PowerPoint presentation tonight. And we're anxious to hear your comments and any of your perspectives on this. So I'll let you take it away, Greg.
Very good. And Greg, if you can hold for just a moment, I'm going to ask the clerk to read the recommendation quickly.
That the Victorville Water District Board of Directors authorize staff to incorporate any requested changes and bring the 5-year water rate study to the next City Council meeting for acceptance and consideration of proceeding with the next steps.
Let's have our presentation.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. I think we're going to try to get the PowerPoint up here so you can see it. Okay, so here's the introduction. If you can go to the next sheet. So the overview of the presentation, we're going to take kind of a high level perspective here, give you the reasons for the study, primary drivers behind the rate adjustments, talk a little bit about the rate design because there are some changes in the rate. There are some changes in the rate design. Talk about the current and the proposed rates. Alice is actually going to cover some of the details in the financial plan and revenue requirements analysis. Next slide. So reasons for the study, typically it's every 5 years that you want to look at your rates to make sure that they're consistent with industry standards. Typically costs have changed enough that you do need to make some changes in the rates in some fashion. As you probably all know, Proposition 218 is the controlling legislation in the state of California, which dictates how you prepare the rates, that they're fair and equitable, they're defensible, that they're cost-based, which really gives you the supporting documents to defend your rates if you were ever sued. So the next slide. So the primary drivers, as most cities, capital improvements are becoming a very big issue. We're hitting periods where a lot of assets need to be replaced or repaired or new ones constructed. So that's always a major concern. Financial stability, particularly when we've just been coming out of a drought and maybe going back into a drought. The financial stability is always a concern and something to look at. Water conservation has become a more important issue over the years. We may be heading into another drought, so that's, again, it's going to be a concern. And then the rate structure basically takes what the cost of service analysis does and looks at what the best way to collect rate revenue from each customer class is. So if you can go to the cost of service slides here now. So in the big picture, rate studies, yeah, back one. So in the big picture, Rate studies are done in three basic parts. The first is that you define the financial plan, which looks at the projected costs and expenses. The ultimate result of that is the net revenue requirements that need to be collected from rates on an annual basis for the next 5 years. The second part of that is really the cost of service, where you take that net revenue requirement and you allocate that out to each customer class on a fair and equitable basis, so that you know how much must be collected from residential customers, commercial customers, and different subclasses of customers. The third part is, once you know, for example, for residential customers, how much you need to collect from them, the question is, do we collect it through 100% fixed rates, 100% volumetric rates, some combination of the two? And what are the impacts that those different rate alternatives have on customer bills? So kind of trying to find the best approach to how to design rates. And then improving revenue stability. Since the rate design does have quite a bit to do with revenue stability, that's part of the analysis. 100% volumetric rates, you'd always get the amount of revenue, maximum stability. 100% volumetric rates, you'd always have conservation incentives, but the revenue stability would be completely missing. So next slide. Okay, so there were some rate structure changes in this as a result of this analysis and working with staff and just looking at what seemed to make the most sense. So as I mentioned, fixed and variable charges are the way that water rates are collected. There were a number of rate alternatives that were considered. As a part of the cost of service analysis, it determined that roughly about 53% of costs are fixed, or that they wouldn't change much with the level of consumption. About 47% are affected by consumption. So if you were to do a strict cost of service based analysis, that's what your rates design would be. 53% collected through fixed charges, 47% through variable charges. The current rate revenue is collected 27% from fixed charges and 73% from variable. So that's very conservation oriented. So with the overall goals of wanting to still encourage conservation, but also improve revenue stability, the ultimate rate design was so that improved the level of stability, going from 27% to 40% for the rate stability, but also went from 73 to 60%. So you still have most of your rate revenue collected through volumetric rates. So that gives customers a greater ability to control their bill by the amount of water that they use. So the other thing about this rate design is often there's a rate shock when you go from, let's say, 27% to 40-60. So a 5-year phase in made a lot of sense. So this rate design gives you a 5-year period to slowly transition into that. So the changes are gradual and gives customers a chance to get used to this new rate design over a 5-year period. The single most significant rate change is the tiered rates for single family customers. So all other customers will continue with a single volumetric rate. One of the key things in the last 5 or 6 years from Prop 218 was that any tiered rates have to be, the cost basis has to be demonstrated. And as it turns out in Victorville, your water supplies fit very well with a two-tiered rate system. So it really made a lot of sense to be able to do that. So this next slide. So the tiered rates as we said, gives more control to the customers. There's also drought charges. You've had drought charges in the past. Drought charges is a very common way to deal with the impacts of droughts when you're asked to reduce consumption. In this case, these wouldn't be implemented until there's a 20% reduction in consumption due to conservation. So we did look at another rate design, as we mentioned, 47% fixed and 53% volumetric. It was really thought that that didn't quite give enough promotion to conservation. It was great for revenue stability, but you know, it's kind of the right mixture of the two. And so the 60-40 really was thought to be a better approach. So these two tiers, as it turns out, the city's cheapest water supply is the groundwater, which you don't pay recharge. You don't pay for the recharging of that water. So that's the cheapest. It's the free production allowance. That is roughly half of your total consumption, your total production. So you've got a very natural fit for a tier one. So this, as we looked at the customer bills and how much people used, when we looked at, and this only applies to single family customers. So when we looked at the amount that single family customers use, 600 cubic feet, 6 units per month of use by single family customers is what adds up to roughly half that. It fits very well with the tier one production. So the tier two, okay, tier two essentially is all above, all the water above tier one. This is your most expensive water. This has a lot of implications for not only the tier price, but you know, drought rates and many other things. So tier two recovers all the, essentially what are the bigger costs. This is your most expensive water. It made a lot of sense to put this all into the second tier. This drives a higher tier two rate. It also, as you'll see later when we look at the average bills over the last 5 years and the next 5 years, it has an impact on that too. So this is the basic way that we design tier two. So next slide. Okay, so as a result of this, this is our rate table, and I apologize, these numbers are so small, but there's a lot of them in there. So we're going from the first year in this rate design is still the 27% fixed and 73% variable. With the rate increases, your typical three-quarter inch customer goes from fixed charge goes from 1336, 15,
Mr. Klempner,
24.
you're
Now, as you'll notice, each of these years going across changes a little bit to get to that.
Mr. Klempner, occasionally you're
Am I
cutting
cutting out?
out on us. So can you repeat the last sentence because
Yeah,
we couldn't hear it?
Greg, I mean, one of the tricks that we use is just to try to maintain the continuity in the voice. Maybe shut off the video because yeah, there are some interruptions on the
Like,
audio.
shut off the video.
Give that
Okay,
a try. Give that a try.
all right. Yeah, maybe if I just try to talk slower and consistent, it won't lose me. All right. So as I was saying, this table implements the recommended 40-60 rate design, and it does so incrementally. As you see across the top there, it transitions from 27% fixed, 73% variable, to on the right, the 40% fixed and 60% variable. For a typical residential customer with a 3/4 inch meter, their fixed charge goes from the current 1336 to, in the first year, 1524. And then as the 27% fixed increases over time, that 1524 ends up being 2581 by the 5th year. Now, the flip side of that is that when you go down to the bottom and look at the commodity charges, the first, the single tier that you currently have of $2.35 per unit. Tier 1 is now $1.41. Tier 2 is $3.58. And then the interesting part is that as you go to the right and follow these rates, Tier 1 actually decreases down to 80 cents in the fifth year. And even the second tier decreases due to reducing the percent of variable or volumetric rate revenue from 73% down to 60%. So even with the rate increases over those 5 years, the volumetric rates decrease. That's just a product of the rate design. For comparison purposes, the far right column is the 4753 option for the fifth year. And you can just see with the rate, each of these rates, the 3/4 inch rate instead of 25.81 would be 30.47, and tier 1 instead of being 80 cents would be 54 cents. So that kind of captures the essence of what the proposed rates are and gives you a comparison of what the other alternative we were considering. So next slide. Okay, so as we mentioned, drought surcharges are a very common way throughout California to deal with the risks of drought mandates. When the government mandates conservation and cutting back, you obviously should be selling less water, you're getting less revenue. The intent of this is that as consumption drops, this is a revenue neutral mechanism to basically offset the revenue that you're losing from reduced consumption. So the essence of this is that there is a certain amount that you can recover that will get you back to revenue neutral. Obviously, when you pump less water, you are not incurring as many costs. And as we mentioned before, your most expensive water would be the first that you would cut back. So the most expensive water gives you a fairly large cost savings, which helps in this whole drought picture. But the big picture in this is that this will keep you from going negative or losing revenue below a level that you're comfortable with. And as we've talked about the rate design, how the fixed increases from 27 to 40% over the 5 years, that is the fixed part is more stable. That is not subject to cutbacks when consumption goes down. And the amount of variable drops from 73 to 60, so you have less revenue you're recovering from conservation. So as it turns out, after the second year, you really don't need the drought rates, which is actually a very good thing. And ultimately, if you kept cutting back, you would be down to your free production, which is the cheapest water that you have. So that's a good situation. So as we mentioned, go back, I'll just finish up this. So they don't kick in until about 20% reduction. And after the second year, you really don't need them for a number of reasons. And one of the other interesting things is that the inflation of your most expensive water is going up at much higher rates than the actual water rates are. So all of this contributes to a fairly well protected revenue source during drought, and that's good news. So the next slide, we have discussed a revenue stabilization rate. I actually don't think this is too much of a concern for you. It is for other areas that are much more at risk of losing revenue. This works in a different way where if your monthly revenue from volumetric rates drops below 10%, you automatically kick into your revenue stabilization rates. And if it's more than 10%, then a higher surcharge kicks in also. This is an automatic thing that happens. And when your consumption returns and you start getting the revenue that you were missing for a period, this is reversible. So it automatically turns off the surcharges and goes back to your normal rates. There's always a public notification for when this is going to happen. And again, it's only for volumetric rates. It's not for the fixed charges. So this is another option to consider. It's been done elsewhere in California. Your drought rates probably are sufficient for your purposes. So next slide. Okay, so Alice is going to give you an overview of the financial plan and the revenue requirements.
Yes, hi, good evening. In this section, I will be reviewing the financial plan findings and recommendations. We'll quickly review the CIP, I believe that you're all familiar with. It would be the 2021 approved water master plan. And then we would go through some customer bill comparisons, just to give you an idea of how the rates have changed and how that affects the customer bill for different customer classes. So. Okay, so in this first slide, we're looking at the findings of the financial plan. So here we see that based on the 2021 approved water master plan, we're looking at a total of about 50.8 million in total project costs for that 5-year rate adoption period. Of those costs, 38.7 million are capital expenditures. In this analysis, we do include it in the full rate model, which you can see, but we do have additional costs after that 10-year, beyond 10 years. I know that that's an additional 38.3 million. So you're looking at a total of over 113 million in total project costs. So number 2, we look at projected costs and inflation. So currently for O&M the next year, we're looking at a total of 29.6 million. And this number will actually grow over the 5-year rate adoption period to about 36.7 million, which is an increase of about 7 million. And that actually includes bullet point number 3, that 4% annual increase in the general cost inflation factor. The CIP for fiscal year 2021-22 was around 9.9 million. And that is actually probably the highest amount in the next 5 years that's coming around. And that number kind of moves around, but by the end, it ranges from 9.9 million here, and it can actually goes down to about 6.7 million in fiscal year 25-26. And one other thing that Greg previously mentioned was the 28% reduction in water sales based on the state mandate. So here we're looking at the target reserve balances. So first we have the operating reserve. We are taking 25% of the total O&M expenses, less water purchases, and less the HDPP project. One thing to note is that this is actually a change from the previous rate study where we're only taking 25% of the O&M. So by doing this here and by deducting the water purchases and costs for HDPP, we're actually lowering the reserve by about 2 million. And so which makes the reserve in the next fiscal year 21-22, about 5.9 million. Second, we have the capital reserve, which is set equal to 3% of net assets. So that comes out to about 4.8 million in fiscal year 21-22, and that stays pretty constant throughout the whole 5-year rate period. And even beyond that, since it is based on net assets, it does stay so you're not going to see a huge up and down based on expenses, whether it's a one-time expense or something that's recurring. And then thirdly, we have the OPEB reserve, and that's set at 8.9 million, and that will not change. So that is very consistent throughout the 5-year rate period, but also beyond as well. Oops, I'm sorry. Okay. And also one thing to note is one thing that we don't necessarily want to do, but if the district or the city had to, that they could actually use some of the funds in the OPEB reserve to actually fund emergency capital projects in the future. So, okay. And here we have the 10-year project list, and this is by project type. We only have the first 10 years here, but you can see, and this comes directly, it's placed directly into the financial plan. You see the 9.9 million in the first year, and that ranges from 9.9 and it goes as low as 6.2 million in year 6. The first 5 years, we'll see in the next slide, they actually total 38.7 million. And one thing that we did not include here is we do have the project costs beyond year 10, which do total about 38.3 million. And so for the entire master plan, I think the total project costs are about 113.8 million. I could be off a little, but so that's where we are. And here is another way of looking at it. And as you can see, most of those project costs are related to the pipeline projects. So. Okay. Here, we've actually added the slide to show you that because you did have the 6.25% rate increases the past 5 years, you were actually able to fund a lot of your projects, up to $35 million worth. And I think that that's great. I think that's what allows us to kind of propose rates that are a little lower than what they were the past 5 years. So in the next couple slides, you'll see that we're proposing rates that are about 3, as opposed to that current, or in the last fiscal year was about 6.25%. So. This is just kind of a summary. If you would like a copy of this, we can definitely provide it. We will provide the presentation and any other documents afterwards at your request. So here is the financial plan. So this basically summarizes all of your revenue and all of your costs. At the top, you have your rate revenue and all your other sources of revenue. And then we have your operating expenses. Debt service is just a line item here because I guess debt service isn't provided or isn't funded through water rates. And then we have the rate funded capital expenses. So these are the expenses that are funded through rates that aren't funded with the reserves. So if you look at the first 2 years in fiscal year 2021-22 and 22-23, you see that there's not much funded through rates. And that means that it's because those projects are actually funded through the capital reserve and the balance that you have there available. And so when you go to that second line, you see the surplus or deficiency before rate increases. And so this is why you actually do need those rate increases. Even though you can say, hey, well, we have, 6 million here surplus, and the first year of the rate period, we still have 4.3. Then you look at the last 3 years of the rate period, and you're looking at a deficit of 3.4, 4.5, and 5.2. So when you go to that following line below, you're seeing what the additional revenue generated from the rate increases that will help with that efficiency. So then basically because of that, you're going from 3.4 million deficiency to about 500,000. And I believe that we're still, looking and kind of tweaking some numbers as well. So I think that these numbers will actually look a little better once we review the, actually let me move to the next slide. Once we review the water right purchases and a couple other items based on your comments and your direction provided today. So this is basically just a graphical representation of that previous slide. So here we're seeing the blue bars represent the O&M expenses, the green bars represent capital expenses, and then you have the solid black line, which represents the revenue you're currently generating with your rates as of today. And then that dotted blue line shows where those revenues should be and where the 3% increase in rate revenue will get you. at that point. So that difference is the rate revenue from the rate increases between the two lines. Okay, so here we have the ending cash balances. Just to make a note, we're including reserve balances for OPEB, capital, and O&M, but that minimum target is only related to capital and O&M reserves. So when we kind of look at this, we're saying that, wow, you are really in a pretty good position here, because the first couple of years, right on target, maybe the next 3-4 years, maybe you're a little below the recommended target, but then you definitely recover towards the end. And like I said previously, this is kind of just the worst case scenario, and this will change slightly. I think that we're working together with everyone to kind of even everything out here to make so that we don't have this gap here compared to the minimum target reserve as opposed to the actual ending cash balances. Okay. So here, this is just kind of a quick look at the difference in rates between the last study and the current study that we're in. And as you can see, in the first year of the current rate study, the rates do go up, and that is a result of many, I guess, several reasons. It's basically due to rate structure, the increase in O&M expenses and capital, planned capital. But then the following year, the rates do drop dramatically. And at the end of the 5-year rate period, it's still below that first initial year. So you're ending up with 47.68, and this is based on 13 HCF. Okay, so here we have a regional bill comparison with all of the surrounding cities, communities, or districts. And as you can see, this is actually based on the second year of the rate study. So we're looking at fiscal year 2022-23. And we're seeing that the proposed rates, this is based on a 3/4 inch meter and 18 HCF, that the bill will actually be less based on the proposed rates and the tiered rates that we are proposing today. So the proposed rates would be $51.48 versus $55.59 using the current rates. Okay, so here we have a bill comparison for single-family residential customers based on a 3/4 inch meter, and we're showing the consumption levels, various levels. And as you can see, based on everything that Greg actually said earlier as well, you can see that we're really looking at by looking at this graph, you can see that consumption is definitely going to be in the hands of the customer. So by actually being able to promote and maintain conservation, the bills are actually much lower. So if you look at the 5 HCF in the beginning, as opposed to, which definitely grow, but you can see how all of these tiered rates are actually tied to conservation as well. Here is a sample of a multifamily water bill, and again, a 3/4 inch meter. We're looking at various levels of conservation. Here, we're looking at a uniform rate. It's not tiered rate, so that's why you won't see that initial, maybe that reduction in the cost due to the tiered rates here. But we're looking at a uniform rate. It's pretty consistent here at different levels. Again, we have the commercial water bill at various levels of consumption, and pretty consistent as well. But again, we don't see that initial savings in the beginning because they aren't tiered rates. We're actually implementing or maintaining the uniform rates that you currently have. Okay. Any questions?
All right. So yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the wonderful and very detailed presentation. It's very, very helpful. We will open it up now to technical questions as it relates to the presentation, and we'll begin with Member Becerra.
I am sorry. Let me get back to.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Mhm.
I don't know who I'm asking, whether Keith, or I'll let Keith says who's gonna answer. On page 8 of the report, not page 8 of our computer, it says that we have to groundwater replenish 10.3% every year for the next 5 years. So at the end of 5 years, we're gonna be replenishing half of more what we're doing right now.
Wait a second.
Let me try to find the page. That likely is relating to our makeup responsibilities.
Yes, sir.
Which-
It is. Well, according to what it reads here, groundwater replenishment and makeup obligation.
Yeah, so one of the responsibilities we have in the overall production of water is there's a couple of components that make up production. First is your free production allowance. Those are basically your water rights. And that's what we as a water district are allowed to freely pump from the ground. This rate plan actually assigns that free production allowance uniformly and equitably to the customer classes. But our actual production, meaning the amounts of water actually pumped out of the ground, exceed your free production allowance right. So for that difference, and Doug can illustrate the numbers, but for that amount that you pull out above what you're freely allowed to produce, you have a responsibility to replace that water cup for cup is the basic illustration. And that's cup for cup into our aquifer, our basin. And we are located in the Alto Basin, but the way the groundwater aquifer works, there's multiple basins, and there's actually downstream basins that have dependency upon the Alto Basin that we currently draw from. So we'll have a replacement requirement to the Alto Basin, which is a 1-for-1 replacement requirement. Then we also have downstream makeup requirements. And that basically is additional water that we have to put into the ground to make sure the downstream users are not shortchanged in terms of the guaranteed flow that cascades through the transition zone into those lower basins. Doug, hopefully I answered that correctly, but can you maybe illustrate the number of our free production rights? For some reason, I think it's like 20,000 acre feet, but also illustrate what we actually pull out of the ground, just so that we can maybe numerically illustrate what a replacement obligation would look like.
Yeah, I'm looking for that document right now, Keith, and I'm not seeing it offhand. And I'm not sure if Carmen has those numbers, because there was a memo that just went out from the city manager, I know, to the council, that really summed up all of our water lease purchases that were a result of this replacement obligation that we lease from other customers. And I think Alice has something up there.
Yes, this was the latest version that I was provided.
That's correct. So between both districts, we have approximately 25,000, a little over 25,000 acre feet of free production allowance due to the ramp down rate. Though, as Keith was mentioning, we actually produce closer to 13,000 acre feet.
Okay. Then and also, so I understand all that. On the drought rates, who sets, and I know it sounds funny, who sets the droughts? The governor or we do?
So usually the state will dictate what what your drought goals are going to be, and they did certainly in the last 5 years, where we were mandated to drop down to 28%. So they have that ability. I wouldn't doubt if it doesn't come again. And you're pretty much held accountable to find a way to coerce your customers into conserving water, or else you get invited up to Sacramento to talk to the legislators up there to tell them why you weren't able to do it.
Okay, so for how long, we don't know. It's what is happening statewide. So it's something out of our control then, right?
It is. I mean, what they're going to come down with, but it's all driven by drought conditions and what the need is to obviously try and save as much water as we can. So, I mean, it is certainly something that needs to be done when they do enact it. And the harder part of this will be this time around is our consumption dropped so much during the last drought that it's going to be harder to find places to conserve. You know, all the grass has been, cash for grass has been out there, the low flow toilets, new appliances, everything's been done out there. Our ordinance is not allowing grass. So, you know, to try and find more ways to conserve short of giving up the necessary things, it's going to be tough. There's no question.
So maybe this goes hand in hand. I noticed code enforcement, there is a section for code enforcement in the budget under water. What's?
Yeah, so we you know, part of the benefit of the water districts coming to the city were to share resources such as finance, HR, and things of that nature. And code enforcement is one of those divisions we get to leverage. And they're the experts in actually the rules on how to enforce your codes and you know, how much notice you have to give. And I don't even know all the particulars, to be honest with you. I mean, I know George Duran would be able to cite them very easily, but water department does rely on them to help us, and they will be the ones to be citing individuals when we need or if we need to get to that point. That's not our first option. We try to educate first and you know, get compliance, but if need be, when we see things like runoff or not adhering to, you know, putting nozzles on your hose or watering days or things of that nature that are enacted, then we'll utilize our code enforcement officers to help us and to help us make sure our codes are written in a manner that's enforceable.
Okay, and last question. If I heard it right, for a single family resident, we're gonna go from number 7 in the area down to number 4 with these new charges?
Correct, and that is, remember, that is for a particular 3/4 inch residential meter of 18 HCF, but like our consultants were mentioning, that's the benefit of this tiered rate structure. It allows for the customer to take a little bit of control. I mean, in the lower tiers, it does drop rates, and in the higher tiers, it doesn't. But that's part of the goal of this, is to promote some conservation. And if you look at it, I mean, the recommended rate increase to begin with across the board, or revenue increase we need, is 3% for 5 years, and that's, you know, well within any cost of living adjustments on top of it. So as far as the recommendation, we feel it's a very fair and reasonable request.
Okay, and we have more single family residential customers than commercial customers? Are they about even?
Um,
Carmen or Alice can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it's 95%.
Actually, single-family residential customers represent about 91% of total customers. And we actually use a 3/4 inch because it actually represents about 88% of total meters as well. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for the presentation. Very well put together. I understood it. Thank you.
If I might just add, just to serve as foundation to one of the questions in the citations given to Councilmember Becerra's comment. I did issue something to the council. It's a memorandum dated April 22nd, and that does talk through the verified production of what we actually produced in the 1920 fiscal year, and also summarizes the free production allowance along with the makeups. That was something that was provided to help summarize the actual leasing of water we had to do to satisfy some of those replacement and makeup obligations. But the free production allowance we have is about 17,300 acre feet, and we actually produced in that water year 24,000 acre feet. So consistent with the numbers that Ms. Kuhn shared with you.
Okay. Thank you, sir. No further questions, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. Member Gomez, do you have questions as to the presentation?
Yes. So my question is related to NBS principal assumptions. At the time of this study, did NBS consider the impact of COVID-19 variants, the general tax on the customer base, and public safety operations, and the maintenance and cost that is associated with its apertures?
Well, I think the short answer to that is really the requirements of Proposition 218 dictates that what we consider is what the actual cost of service is water is. Related to COVID-19, the only consideration would be looking to make sure we have adequate reserves to be able to cover periods where we have these strange circumstances of uncollected debt and no water shutoffs, where we have a lot of uncollected debt to be able to cover and still run the water system.
So the easy answer to that is, did you or did you not consider the COVID-19 variants and then the monies that were coming in? Because if this report is a year old and we're in it a year, it wouldn't seem measurable that we did take those into consideration because NBS was hired before COVID-19.
The actual report is a much more current report. In fact, this report is hot off the press. NBS was brought on a while ago, but the results that you're looking at are current results. They're not a year old. So I guess to answer the question, we have considered all of the effects known to us resulting from the COVID pandemic.
Will the draft technician's memo be altered after its adoption?
The memo would be altered only if there were requests that were approved, that were, authorized by the council. If they wanted something different, of course, it could be altered. But really, as Alice was saying, the only thing we're looking at is just smoothing out our reserve and by adjusting the amount of water purchases we're making. It doesn't affect our rate structure. It'll still be the same recommendation of the 3% and the same 40-60 split as we have here, and the same recommendation is to the total amount of reserves if approved by the council.
Thank you. And related to the revenue stability rate, what's the public's notification adequacy? In other words, what is the term adequate in terms of legal notifications? What do we adhere and what is it wielding?
Greg, do you want to touch on that one?
You're talking about the Prop 218 noticing process?
I think she's talking about the rate stabilization option.
Oh, the rate stabilization option. Yeah, that is, it has to be adopted in the resolution, part of the whole rate package. The way that has worked for other agencies is that the increases are done automatically when there's a 10% drop in monthly volumetric rate revenue. And then if that reduction in revenue goes away, the rates are automatically rescinded. So the public notification would be at a board meeting where it is announced, this is what we're doing.
But for this presentation and for this technical memorandum, what's in there right now are drought surcharges as opposed to the rate stabilization rates. And that's what's being recommended at this time. The revenue stabilization rates were merely shown as an option that was looked at or could be considered. So they would be published in part of the Proposition 218 process, just as are the current drought rates.
For the cost inflation factors, what assumptions based on what factors were used to establish the customer growth?
Well, we're actually using a 2% annual growth for customer growth. And that's actually based on information data that we received from staff regarding expenses and revenues in the budget.
Regarding what? I'm sorry, I didn't catch her. Regarding stats.
No, regarding the information that we received regarding revenue revenues and expenses in the budget.
And if NBS is recommending, well, I suppose you answered that question, we're not going to consider the revenue stabilization rates, right? That was for other cities, I suppose.
That was kind of an option that we were presenting, but for the board or the city council to consider if they wish. But as of now, as Mr. Matthews, as Doug has said, we're actually only presenting the drought rates at this time. That would be another process. We would actually have to go in and calculate the revenue stabilization rates because we have not done that at this time.
Okay, thank you. And what does OPED and the projection of water rates have to do with customer rate increases?
Really nothing.
Yeah, I don't.
OPEB is a separate reserve.
The OPEB is a separate reserve for your post-employment benefit obligations, and it doesn't have a direct impact on rates unless the OPEB fund is not properly funded. We're currently properly funded, so it's not really having an effect on rates. But to the extent it wasn't properly funded and you were trying to achieve a proper funding level, then likely it would require rates to satisfy funding that. But we have been adequately funded for at least the last 5 years that I'm aware of. Certainly that's how we planned for it in the last rate plan.
And what's the purpose of the commodity charge? How does the district account for it, and when will it appear in the financial ledgers? I'm presuming that this commodity charge is something extra.
The commodity charge is just the cost for water.
Yeah, but I just
so-
don't understand why we're charging for the first tier.
Okay, so that's part of your operating cost to actually pump and produce the water. And Doug or Greg, you want to take a stab at explaining the tier one again and the difference between tier one and tier two?
Sure. Our tier one, and Alice, maybe you could go to those pie charts.
Okay.
Sure. But again, our tier one water is our cheapest water. We don't have a replacement obligation or a makeup obligation on our free production allowance. So what we did is considered that to be put in the first tier, and what it amounted to is we needed to collect from the residential side $3.2 million to cover the cost of producing that first tier of free production allowance. So that's what the tier one represents. On the tier two side, it's more expensive water. So the remaining costs include replacement obligations, makeup obligation, and the remaining commodity costs. So it's a higher cost of water where we need to collect 10.2 million from the remaining commodity costs to cover that. And you can see from the pie charts, you can see one is certainly smaller than the other, but it does what it does at the end of the day is it certainly helps our customers be able to, in some cases, lower their rates with a 3% rate increase, and for others at least keep it manageable and further to promote conservation.
So saying it differently and perhaps relating it back to the information that I shared with you in the memo and just summarized, but if, for example, you have free production allowance requirement, a free production allowance equal to 17,000 acre feet of water, that's going to have a cost of X. The amount of water that you produce above that, in the example we just gave, it's about 24,000 acre feet of water. So for that differential, the 7,000 acre feet, that is going to be a type of water that costs more than the actual 17,000 acre foot that are under free production allowance. And the reason being is because for that additional 7,000 above your free production allowance, you actually have to pay, let's just call it MWA. That's probably the easiest example without talking about leasing water rights. You basically have to pay MWA a replacement water cost. And what that means is you're paying for a cost to pull water out of the aqueduct to the order of that 7,000 acre feet. So Doug, what's water costing out of the aqueduct right now? About $650 an acre foot?
I think it was like
604.
Yeah.
Okay, so 604, but the point is still the same. That water that's above your free production rights, in the most simplest way to explain it, is costing that amount more than what the cost of water is that's freely produced.
Okay, thank you. Where do the fixed services versus the fire fixed services payment will be, where would that be coming from? If you can direct yourself to figure 13 for that.
It would be this, right?
Yes.
So repeat your question again, please.
Yeah, the fire fixed services versus the fixed services, where is that coming from? Connection fees, there was a couple of categories.
So the fixed service charges come from all customers with just a regular meter, whether it's a domestic meter, a commercial, and industrial, and irrigation. The fire fixed service charges come from just fire services only that aren't intended to really flow water except in the emergency. So they're not continual takers of water, but since our system has to be designed to handle the capacity they need at times, there does need to be a fixed fee in there to be able to take care of the costs associated with having that in our system and maintaining it.
Okay. And which of the consumer class categories?
My apologies. Mayor Pro Tem Irving, do you have any questions as it relates to the presentation?
I do have a few. First of all, I want to say thank you for this very comprehensive report and a detailed analysis. This does not happen to be my area of expertise, so I'm trying to wrap my mind around all of the technical jargon and so forth. But there are a few things that you could clarify for me or give me a deeper understanding. I understand that we did not look at the revenue stabilization model, but it was proposed or evaluated or looked at as an alternative model within the report. Currently, we're looking at drought rates. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and all of the projections that were in the financial plan, those are based on the drought rate model. Is that correct?
So the drought rates don't really impact your regular rates. They're just in addition to make up for any lost revenue that would come from a reduction in water sales beyond.
Okay. Okay. Well, I guess my question is, I like the revenue stabilization model. At what point will we get an opportunity to have that discussion on which model we will use, or because I followed along I did pretty good actually with the proposal for the revenue stabilization model. So at another point, will we have that opportunity to have that deep discussion?
I'll defer to the city manager on this one, but that certainly could be considered and brought forth at the next meeting. What we would have to do if the revenue stabilization rates were determined, NBS would have to go back and determine what those rates are. But that one is actually based on a reduction in revenues from a number of items, maybe not even just drought, but it could be a COVID pandemic or whatnot. If it would be tied exactly to your revenues and needs, and it would go away if the revenues rebounded. Where the conservations are tied to a conservation target.
Okay. Well, can I ask you a more pointed question? Is there a reason why we're just looking at the drought rates? Can you help me understand that? Is that because that's what's before us? Why would the consultants, I guess, prefer that model as opposed to the revenue stabilization model?
It's what we have in place currently. It's fairly commonly used. I think that the consultant was just looking to present another option that certainly could be considered.
Okay, and finally, I'm referring to page 10, figure 4, where it discusses the projections, 10-year projections for reserve fund balances is largely dependent on whether or not we are in a position to purchase additional permanent water rights. Will we be in that position? Do you foresee that we will be in the position to make those purchases or that purchase?
That's a great question. So if you look at that graph right now, one of the reasons, if you look at the first year of 2022, one of the reasons that capital R&R reserve goes down is because this is a worst case scenario right here where we would be spending $7.5 million in the first 2 years to buy water rights, which would eventually help reduce your rates because we wouldn't be having to lease water or purchase water annually. We would own the rights, and they're getting harder and harder to purchase. But this one is a worst case scenario where we would purchase them in the first 2 years. As was talked about by Alice, we looked at a couple other options where we can smooth this out a little bit and make it where that red line would pretty much meet the green and the yellow bars, where we wouldn't be a little bit into OPEB. In this model, though, it shows that at the very last 3 years, we're still in good shape, even doing the $7.5 million each year. So there is an opportunity, but it certainly depends on availability of water and water rights that people are willing to sell. So we're in a good position to have some cash to be able to do this and look at this over the next few years. And that's really a positive thing coming out of one of the reasons is our, as stated in the city manager's memo to you, is all the money we've saved over the 5 years from leasing water as opposed to buying it at the MWA rate.
Okay, all right, thank you. I don't have any further questions. Thank you so much.
If I might, Madam Mayor, I'd like to try to ferret out an answer to Mayor Pro Tem Irving's question of drought versus revenue stabilization. And I'm not exactly sure I have a preference one or the other, because, and this is a question to the consultant, I don't necessarily know if I can see a net difference between one versus the other. What I do see is, because we've also experienced it in the past and we're staring at it here in the near future, I think we've got some drought related issues that we're going to be contending with. Whereas, especially having survived the pandemic, I didn't necessarily see something akin to rate stabilization really needing us to help get through the pandemic. But I guess the real question maybe for Greg would be, is there any net difference between the two, whether we enacted drought surcharge versus rate stabilization?
Thank you, Mr. Metzler.
Yeah, there is a difference. That the mechanisms are quite different. The drought rates are widely used. They were initially created, because of the severe drought for many years. They are specifically tied to conservation levels and drought stages. So it really is a mechanism that is intended to not let you lose too much revenue when you're being mandated to sell less water. The revenue stabilization is a quite different mechanism. It doesn't directly tie to conservation levels. It could be weather. It could be any reason that you have a projected monthly revenue from volumetric rates, and anytime this is just a straight math calculation, anytime you're 10% or more below that projection, the revenue stabilization rates automatically kick in to right the ship, and until you start getting the projected monthly amounts of volumetric rate revenue, it will stay there. Once you get back to normal for a month, they would automatically get turned off. And some of the reason of this is a legal perspective. The attorneys that looked at this said, we do not want you coming in and taking action to increase rates, to turn on the revenue stabilization. That has to be an automatic thing where your general manager or your director, public works director, comes in and says, the way this works is we are now in this case, it is going to automatically happen. You don't take a vote on it. It just automatically happens.
And so having heard that, my view, and I'll do a comparison. My advice, if we were talking about the electric utility, for example, would be absolutely we should impose some kind of rate stabilization on the electric utility. And I say that because on the electric utility, knowing the number of customers that we have, the lack of diversity we have, if you will, in customer class. And I say that because you have a couple of customers over there that are really large customers that make up a very large share of your sales. And if, for example, they went dark, they closed up shop, that would actually impact or impair the utility's ability to generate the revenue necessary to cover. I would be concerned about the fixed costs. Okay, there's a variable and fixed just on electric as well. And you would lose an ability to be able to cover the costs necessary to maintain the system. I use that as an example to try to illustrate comparison to the Victorville Water District, where you've got 35,000 plus or minus customers. You've got a very broad spectrum. And so comparing the type of risk that I just illustrated on the electric side, where say you have somebody go dark, that's a big user, you don't have that same sensitivity on the water rate side. So certainly, of course, if a house goes vacant, you're not going to feel that from a revenue perspective on the utility side. And even if you lost a big industrial customer, it'd really be hard to see that similarly natured impact as you would on the electric utility because of the difference in the makeup on the customer class. So having heard Greg's example and knowing that, we can at least reasonably foresee a drought and that being real, it would be my view to try to plan a rate plan more so around what we can predict. And I think it's fair to predict that we're going to be staring at a need to attend to the drought as opposed to potential shock to the system because you lose a customer or you lose an amount of consumption. I just don't see that risk as great on the water side.
I understand. I probably need to revisit this portion of the report. The way I saw it is this model sort of provided us a buffer against loss of revenue. So that's how I processed it, but I'll revisit it. Thank you.
And that actually is correct. That's exactly what it would serve as is a buffer. But I think what I'm trying to suggest in this particular case is the risk isn't that great. It isn't that necessary on the water side. On the electric side, it's absolutely.
Okay, I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem. Okay, I have a few questions. So staying on this subject a little bit about revenue stabilization and how the surcharges would be automatically triggered for a variety of situations that could occur. Since we're having such inflation in terms of the cost of water production, could that be one of them? At some point, I mean, are we projecting that inflation is going to continue in the cost?
Greg, do you want to try that?
Yeah. Well, we've included what we think is inflation in those costs. I think this would be, this is actually what the pass-through was created for. So anytime you have a production cost, whether it's electricity, purchased water, pumping costs, whatever, if you project that it's going to go up by 7%, it goes up by 15%, that's an unexpected production cost, right, which rather than make you go back and do another Prop 218 because you need to raise rates, the pass-through actually allows you to just make an announcement that this particular cost went up by X, and that means to offset that cost, let's say the volumetric charge has to go up from $1.41 to $1.51. So there are other mechanisms for your specific example, but there's probably other types that wouldn't be covered by pass-through.
Okay. Excuse me. Okay. And the past, up until this point, there's been a 6% increase year over year. And now we're looking at potentially 3% if we take that, the one option. And I know that there was a comment made when we did the 6% year over year. We've actually got millions in reserves that will lend itself towards capital improvement projects. Was that the calculation in the original, in the past rate study, so that we could save those monies for capital projects?
Yes, you had the same concept in the previous rate plan. One thing that I think is worth noting is that in the last rate plan, similar to what we're doing here, you're assessing and evaluate over a 5-year period what rates are necessary to maintain the system. And in the I guess what is the current rate plan ending this fiscal year, you had 6.25% increases from years 2 through 5. Actually, the original recommendation when we adopted that rate plan was to uniformly have about 6% increases over the entire 5 years. And for some reason, I just can't recall, they did a rate pass in the first year. But I think it's important to note a large part of the reason why, in comparison to the recommendation that you're dealing with here, in seeing such a differential, then being 6.25, now being 3%, is they had some catching up to do. And so in previous years, and I believe there was some years that they had gone where they had not adopted a rate plan and then effectively had to forego rate increases. You know, sadly, the way the model works is the more you forego or the more you kick, the can down the road, it actually reduces your ability to maintain those certain capital reserve requirements or the operating reserve requirements that you need to basically help manage the cash to satisfy the operating or the capital needs over time. So effectively what happens is you start depleting your capital, and then all of a sudden you've got a big capital spend. Say you've got to build a reservoir, you got to take on so many different pipelines. It's actually going to spike the need for cash into the system sooner, which would yield a higher rate. So I guess with that being said, there is value in what we've accomplished over the current 5-year plan ending this year, and that is there has been some efficiencies realized in cost savings over those 5 years. Those don't get ignored. Those actually get factored into this rate plan, and we actually get to put that to use in this rate plan, and it's reflective in the lower cash need over time to manage the next 5 years. And that's effectively why you see a difference in rate increase over the last 5 years versus this upcoming 5 years, 6.25 versus 3%, pretty meaningful difference. But you're also getting the benefit of having prudently managed that cash and carried it forward and not spent it frivolously.
Okay.
And Madam Mayor, if I could just add to your last question on the technical memo, on the 4th page, there's cost inflation factors, but
Right.
groundwater replenishment makeup obligation, we have 10.3% year over year, RQ'd water 7, utilities production power 9 year over year. So I think we're fairly conservative in some of those and
Okay.
make sure we have adequate, revenues.
Right. And this is all based on best information. I mean, we don't have a crystal ball. We can just make projections, right?
Correct.
Okay. And so, excuse me, I believe I know the answer to this, but I just want to bring it out. So O&M and R&R, they're separate and distinct from capital improvement, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then just one other follow-up question to an answer received by member Becerra. It was said that 91% of our customers are single family and they have the 3/4 inch meters, but 88 but 80, I think I wrote this down wrong, but 88%. There was like a difference of 3%. So does that other 3%, do they have larger meters and pay a higher rate?
Yes, that's correct. So what those figures were 91% of our customers are single family residential. Of those, 88% are 3/4 inch. So the others would be
Okay.
1 or larger.
And do they pay a higher rate?
They don't pay a higher commodity rate. They do pay a
Okay.
higher fixed charge.
Okay, great. And then if we, I'm sorry, one last question on slide 26. Okay, so it looks like in the 3 outermost years, our revenues aren't quite meeting capital expenses. Am I reading that right?
So the dark black line are revenues under our existing rate. So if we were to
Right, but in the proposed, you're right.
the other one's proposed, so it shows we are collecting enough to handle both O&M and capital expenses. With the blue dashed line, those are the revenues under the rate increases of 3% for 5 years.
But it looks like to me in 2029, based on the projection, that it's significantly into below the cost of capital expense.
Oh, I got you. Yeah, it's a little bit up there, but we're doing another rate study in 5 years. So these are just based on.
So we'll adjust over time. Okay. All right, that's all I have. Thank you very much. All right, with that said, the chair invites a motion for the council to direct that this matter be brought back to it to initiate the Proposition 218 process.
So moved, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. We have a first. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. We have a first by member Becerra, a second by
I have a question of clarity.
Member Gomez, your time was already completed on the questions. So
Yeah, the question of clarity is not for that. It's for what you're motioning to do.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so I thought this was to receive and file and automatically there's a hearing date, or is that not the case?
That's not the case, member Gomez. And that's why the chair invited the motion such that it is. So we have a first by member Gomez, excuse me, member Becerra, second by Mayor Pro Tem Irving.
And what was the motion?
We're going to now, the motion is that the council direct that this matter be brought back to it at the June 1st meeting to initiate the Proposition 218 process.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're now going to take discussion on the pending motion, beginning with the maker of the motion, member Becerra.
No
comments.
Yes,
Thank
no
you.
comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Irving, any comments on the pending motion?
No comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Gomez is precluded from making comments as she spoke as an audience member on this item. The chair has no comments on the pending motion. Discussion is now closed. Madam Clerk, will you please take the vote?
Councilmember Becerra,
Aye.
Councilmember Gomez,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Irving,
Aye.
Mayor Jones.
Aye.
That motion passes.
Thank you. So this item or this matter we brought back to the council on June 1st to begin the Proposition 218 process. That said, we're going to move on to the addendum item. Mr. Metzler, this is.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. Yes, this.
Mr. Metzler, I'm so sorry. So this is to amend the fiscal year 2021 table of organization, adding an increase of 6 firefighter paramedics to the fire department. Thank you, Mr. Metzler.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. Yes, this item was put on the agenda really intending to help us expedite and achieve our target date of standing up Station 315 by July 3rd. That's our current target date. And we have actually undertaken a recruitment for the 6 firefighter paramedics that would, on the interim basis, serve as the unit standing up that station until such a time as we can outfit that station with an actual medic engine. And at that point in time, it's going to take about a year to bring that medic engine on board because it's got to be fabricated. But until we can outfit that entire station with a fully complemented medic engine, we intend to stand up 315 with a medic squad, a 2-man medic squad. And so with that, we've undertaken the recruitment. We do have some candidates that have gotten through the process far enough to the point where we're actually in a position to start tendering offer letters for hire. The one administrative challenge that we've run into, which is why we're here tonight, is that the table of org establishes a position control. Our position control, employee position control currently is 427 employees, and that effectively is the framework I'm authorized as the manager to work within. And so we cannot issue offers of employment for employees that exceed that 427. We need to staff station 315 with 6 employees, and we'd like to tender offers as soon as possible so that we can potentially get them started and in some kind of a training environment as early as June so that they're ready to help to stand up. So with that, this item is really asking to add 6 new firefighter paramedics to the table of organizations so that the position control is modified from 427 to 433, and therefore giving me the flexibility or the ability, I should say, in actually tendering offers to these prospective firefighter employees.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Metzler. Madam Clerk, will you please read the recommendation?
That the city council approve the hiring of 6 new firefighter paramedics for the opening of Fire Station 315 and amend the fiscal year 2021 table of organization to reflect the additional positions.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We're going to move on to technical questions for clarification, beginning with Member Gomez.
I don't have any questions.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Irving.
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Member Becerra.
Hold on, there we go. Yes, I do. Mr. Metzler, which station is 315? Is that Eucalyptus?
Yes, at the very southwest town, right there at Mesa Linda Park on Eucalyptus, that is station 315.
And at the present moment, there is no firefighters at that station at all. So any of the problems we have on 395 comes from comes from La Mesa and Amethyst, correct?
Your primary responding station will be 313 if you're in the southwest part of the community. Yeah, so that is Amethyst and La Mesa.
So it would help, this station opening up is going to help our response time to any issues we have on 395 area, correct?
Yes, that is correct. And this was this was identified as a part of the public safety plan. In fact, we had some heat maps showing obviously what station 313 reasonably could respond to within a 5-minute response time. And certainly this area, we just could not meet that response time. So this will definitely beef up our ability to attend to any medical issues, certainly in the southwestern part of town. And of course, medical calls, I believe, and Chief Armstrong's here to correct me, I believe our medical calls are at a pace of about 77, 78% of total call volume.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, sir. No further questions.
Thank you, Member Becerra. I have a couple. Mr. Metzler, so I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it because I think it's going to be helpful to our community. So we're expected to receive our first round of Measure P money sometime in August, correct?
That's what I understood, but I've also been corrected. I believe if we haven't received some already, we may receive the first tranche, if you will, as early as June, but I'm going to defer either to Smith or Mr. Mendiola, because I believe there's a better answer than what I had before, which was the August timeframe.
Thank you, Mr. Metzler, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Yeah, we're currently looking at probably more likely late June, early July, and then you'll see that every month coming in, little tidbits here and there for the April through June, fourth quarter of fiscal year 21.
Okay, terrific. So we've already, in advance of a huge intake of revenue on Measure P, we've already moved to a proactive model on code enforcement, which was much needed. And then now we're going to go ahead, and prior to that, we're going to open up Fire Station 315 and hire on firefighters. So I just, normally people looking at their household budgets, that's putting the cart before the horse. But can you assuage any concerns that our community might have with that?
I do not. In fact, the fiscal appropriation that we're talking about here is really working within the existing budget. So it's not for anything new. These would be eligible to charge against Measure P. So that's a book entry we can do at a later date. But I don't have any concerns. These are more than anything just necessary steps that we've got to put in place if we realistically want to achieve an actual physical stand-up by, in this case, July 3rd.
Okay, so you're just making adjusting entry in the future against the Measure P fund.
That's
So,
right.
and when is our Measure P committee going to first meet?
Our first introductory meeting is this Thursday. I believe it's at 5 o'clock. And that's largely an introductory meeting. And the expectation is that they would convene again next week so that they can actually undertake some of the business that's necessary before we actually present the budget to you, I believe on the 25th. So this week and next week, they're expected to convene.
Great. All right. Thank you. Chair has no further questions and invites a motion to adopt the staff's recommendation.
So moved, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. First by Member Becerra. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. And a second by Mayor Pro Tem Irving. We're going to get into discussion on the pending motion, beginning with the maker, Member Becerra.
No questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Irving, comments on the pending motion?
I only want to say that I'm really excited that we're going to hire these, the additional firefighters for Station 3, was it 315?
Mm-hmm.
And thank you, Madam Mayor, for pointing out that the cost can be charged against the Measure P funds. But other than that, it's exciting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Gomez. Comments on the pending motion?
Yes. I do believe when the chair was asking questions about Measure P, it was not within the scope, not only of the table of organization, but within this agenda item.
Okay, Member Gomez, we're talking about comments on the pending motion. If you could confine your comments.
My comments were provided. Thank you for recognizing.
Thank you, Member Gomez. And the chair has no comments as to the pending motion. Discussion period is closed. Madam Clerk, will you please take the vote?
Councilmember Becerra,
Aye.
Councilmember Gomez,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Irving,
Aye.
Mayor Jones.
Aye.
That motion passes.
All right, so the council has just adopted staff's recommendation. And with that said, ladies and gentlemen, there's no further business before us and this meeting stands adjourned. Thank you.